city lost to the waters for nearly 4 decades has re-emerged in northern Iraq. In Dahok province, a dramatic drop in Mosul Dam water levels.
In the spring of 2022, an Iraqi farmer outside the town of Duhok walked down to the edge of the Mosul Dam reservoir and saw something that had been hidden underwater for 40 years. Mud brick walls, the tops of buildings, the outline of a fortified city, rising out of the receding lake as if someone had drained a bathtub and left an empire at the bottom of it. Within weeks, a team of German and Kurdish archaeologists, led by Professor Peter Pfalzner of the University of Tübingen and Dr. Hassan Ahmed Qasim of the Kurdistan Archaeology Organization, were on site, digging in mud, running out of time, racing the water back up. They had identified the ruins. They were sitting on top of Zakiku, an important city of the Mitanni Empire, a Bronze Age civilization that controlled most of northern Mesopotamia from roughly 1550 to 1350 before the Common Era, and was then erased so completely from history that the empire's own capital city has still never been found. What the team pulled out of the ground in the next 6 weeks rewrote a chapter of human history nobody knew was missing: a palace, a multi-story storage building, fortified walls, and in 5 large ceramic jars in the corner of one room, more than 100 unfired clay tablets covered in cuneiform script. Tablets that had no business surviving. Tablets that, by every rule of archaeology, should have dissolved into mud the moment the reservoir filled in 1984. They did not dissolve. They sat at the bottom of the lake for 40 years, in liquid water, in the dark, and waited. In 2025, the drought returned. The water dropped again, and the team went back down to a city that had been holding the missing pieces of an empire for 3,400 years. This is what they found. To understand why Zakiku matters, you have to understand what the Mitanni Empire was, and why almost no one alive today has ever heard of it. In the middle of the second millennium before the Common Era, the Mitanni ruled most of northern Mesopotamia. Their territory stretched from the Mediterranean coast in the west to the Zagros Mountains in the east. They were one of the 4 great powers of the Bronze Age, the others being Egypt, the Hittites of Anatolia, and Babylon. Their kings exchanged letters with the pharaohs of Egypt. We have those letters. They survive in the archives of Akhenaten at Tel el Amarna. But here is what is missing. The Mitanni capital city has never been found. The historical sources name it Wasukani and describe it as a city of palaces and treasuries, somewhere along the Kaba River. Archaeologists have been searching for over a century. Nothing has been confirmed. A second Mitanni city, Taidu, is also missing. A third, Irid, is missing. The empire ruled for 200 years. Then it collapsed under pressure from the Hittites in the west, led by kings like Suppiluliuma I, who sacked Mitanni territories, and the Assyrians in the south. This was part of what historians call the Late Bronze Age collapse, a period around 1200 BCE when many ancient civilizations fell or transformed. The Hittites carried off the royal family, the Assyrians took the territory, and the cities of the Mitanni were abandoned, looted, and forgotten. For 3,000 years, no one knew who they had been. When the Mosul Dam was built in the 1980s to provide water for northern Iraq, the engineers were warned by archaeologists that the reservoir would flood ancient sites along the eastern bank of the Tigris. The warnings were noted. The dam was built anyway. The water rose. The mounds disappeared. For 40 years, whatever the Mitanni had left behind on the eastern bank stayed under the lake, stable, cold, anaerobic, waiting. The drought of 2021 and 2022 was the worst Iraq had seen in modern history. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers, which created civilization itself 8,000 years ago, were running at fractions of their normal flow. The Mosul Reservoir, the largest body of water in Iraq, dropped meter after meter through the winter. By January of 2022, the water had pulled back far enough that local farmers began noticing structures along the shore. Walls, brick courses. The Kurdish-German archaeological team, which had partially excavated a smaller part of the site during a previous drought in 2018, was alerted within days. They mobilized. What they had was a window of weeks before the water came back up. The site, known to archaeologists as Commune, was on the eastern bank of the ancient Tigris. The team focused on the largest exposed structure first. It was a palace, walls preserved to a height of 7 meters, plastered rooms, frescoes still visible on some of the interior surfaces in red and blue pigment that had survived 4 decades underwater. The architecture matched what was known about Mitanni royal construction from a single other partially excavated site. But the palace was just the front gate. Around it, the team began documenting the rest of a city, a massive industrial storage complex with multiple floors, fortification walls, streets, the footprint of an organized urban center with a kind of architectural ambition that the standard historical narrative did not give the Mitanni credit for. Stop and let that land. The empire that was supposed to have left almost nothing behind had, in fact, built a fortified provincial city of palace-grade architecture, multi-story warehouses, and city walls, and the reason historians did not know about it is that the only intact example had been flooded by a dam in 1984, and the team had weeks to dig before the water returned. In one of the rooms of the storage complex, the archaeologists found something that should not have existed. 5 ceramic vessels, large, intact, standing in the corner of the room exactly where someone had placed them more than 3,000 years ago. The team carefully lifted the lids. The jars were full of clay tablets, cuneiform tablets, over 100 of them. Some still sealed inside their original clay envelopes, the ancient version of a sealed letter that the recipient was supposed to break open to read. Here is the part that the team has described in published statements as close to a miracle. The tablets were unfired. They were made of soft clay, sun-dried at most, never put in a kiln. Unfired clay dissolves in water. It does not survive 40 days submerged, let alone 40 years. The tablets had been sitting in a lake. They survived because the building they were in burned down. Around 1350 before the Common Era, the city was destroyed by an earthquake. The walls collapsed. The wooden ceilings caught fire. The fire in the room where the jars sat was hot enough and long enough to do what the ancient scribes never had: it baked the clay. The same disaster that destroyed Zakiku is the only reason the tablets were still legible 3,300 years later. The tablets are written in Akkadian, the diplomatic language of the late Bronze Age, though the Mitanni themselves spoke Hurrian. They date to the period immediately after the earthquake, when the city was being rebuilt under Middle Assyrian rule. They include administrative records, legal documents, and correspondence that, when fully translated, will be the largest corpus of texts from this exact transition period ever recovered. To put this in perspective, the most significant Mitanni text archive previously known came from Nusi. But these Zakiku tablets represent a different time period and administrative context entirely. That work is still going on. The first transcriptions began in 2023. The full publication of the tablet corpus is expected over the next decade. What is already clear is that the historical picture of how the Mitanni Empire ended and how the Assyrians took over the territory is going to need to be rewritten when the tablets are done. If this is the kind of story that pulls you in, a city that was buried, then drowned, then surfaced again with its records intact 3,300 years later, keep watching. Because the next part of this is the part that the team did not expect. In February of 2022, the rains came back. The reservoir rose. The team covered every excavated wall in heavy plastic sheeting, weighted with stones, sealed against the water. The city went back under. For 3 years, that was where Zakiku sat, underwater, waiting. Then, in the summer of 2025, the drought returned. Iraq's water crisis, which has been steadily worsening since 2021, hit a new low point. The Mosul Reservoir dropped again. By autumn, parts of the eastern bank were exposed for the second time in 3 years. The team went back. What they found this time was that the plastic sheeting had worked. The walls they had excavated in 2022 had been protected from resubmersion damage. They could pick up where they had stopped, and the lower water levels of 2025 exposed parts of the city they had never reached the first time: a second residential quarter, more fortification walls, and in late 2025 and into 2026, what early reports from the field describe as a second cache of tablets, possibly larger than the first. The team has not yet published the new tablet count. The translations are ongoing, but here is what is being said quietly in the academic press. The new texts may include references to a previously unknown Mitanni king. They may include diplomatic correspondence between Zakiku and other lost Mitanni cities. They may, when fully translated, contain the first directional clues to the location of the missing capital. An empire that vanished from history 3,000 years ago is now being slowly reassembled, one clay tablet at a time, by a team racing a reservoir. The water will come back. It always does. The Mosul Dam is what feeds northern Iraq, and every time the drought ends, Zakiku goes back under, and the question of whether the team got there in time becomes the question of whether the next drought comes in time for the next chapter. So here is what I want to know from you. If you were Pfalzner in the team, and you had to choose between two strategies, race to dig every visible structure before the water rises, knowing you will damage the site, or carefully document a smaller area to the highest archaeological standard, knowing the rest may stay buried for another generation. Which one do you pick? Drop your answer below. And if Zakiku rattled you, wait until you see what divers found at the bottom of a lake in Guatemala last year. A complete Mayan ceremonial complex, intact, sitting under 30 meters of fresh water, with offerings still placed where the priests left them. That video is up next. Click it before the dam closes again.